All right, ladies and gentlemen, this machine before me is indicating that I am live. There will be a short delay, during which I will pour myself a non-alcoholic beverage. And you all, I hope, will let me know here whether or not I am audible and visible. I am standing by, waiting in the chat. Ladies and gentlemen, let me know if I am audible and visible. Also, hopefully there will be no problem with the fan noise. I'm trying to use a different microphone. Hopefully it's working. Okay, good. All right, and no bad fan noise driving people crazy. I'm trying to keep the boomerisms to a minimum. Do let me know. And while you guys are responding in the chat, I will quickly go over some books I am reading just as a sort of opening appetizer. Some of them I should have read and finished by now, but this will give us, like a minute or so for people to come in the stream. And by the way, hello to Waterpenny. Hello to John Ski, who says there is bad fan noise. Damn. All right, well, here's the problem. And hello to Nick as well. Here's the problem. There's not much I can do about it if there is, because if I start digging into the stream software, as inept as I am, it's going to be nasty. All right, just tell me this. Does it get louder this way? Like, is it loudest right here, or is it loudest right here? That way I can know whether or not it's the microphone over here, and if it is screwed, then the fan's just going to go. I can try and move my laptop further away, but that is it. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we've just got a short moment here. It's not a big deal. Just yell over it and you won't notice. Okay. All right. I am sorry, ladies and peoples and gentlemen's. Yeah, people are coming in, but I will throw some knowledge out here about the books I'm currently reading, give them a little bit more time, and then I will get started with my ideas, and then we will move to Ask Me Anything. So, yeah, this is what I'm reading. I'm still reading Burke's Reflections on the Revolution in France, which I know I should have read a million years ago and should have finished by now. I'm still reading Julius Evola's Metaphysics of Sex. I found that in my dad's books. I haven't actually paid with any of my own money for Julius Evola yet, but it's promising so far. He actually knows some shit. And I'm digging my way through this, writing An Authority in Early China by Mark Edward Lewis. It is it's excellent in terms of getting your teeth into what's going on with their view of writing and records and such things. That apple juice is good. But here are the books that I do need to dig into and haven't even started yet. I've got real problems with my reading right now because I spend so much time doing things online that I'm not spending as much time reading things on paper, but I will get to these. Okay, so this is a great one. This is by a guy named Loyal Rue. I've read a bit of it, but I have to come back to it. It's called By the Grace of Guile. And it is subtitled The Role of Deception in Natural History and Human Affairs. And that's very, very interesting when you look at it from the perspective of biology, where you've got animals that send different signals, many of them intended to be deceptive in order to gain survival advantage. All of this will bear, as a matter of fact, to some extent upon what I'll be talking about in a bit. I don't even know what that Freudian slip was. In a bit. But we'll get to that. Inspiration, signals, warfare, attack on the future, topics that we'll be considering. So yeah, By the Grace of Guile. We'll put these on the floor, actually. Another one is Thomas Marcus, his book Buildings and Power that I've been, recommending so frequently, and I continue to do so. Get it, Buildings and Power, Freedom and Control and the Origin of Modern Building Types by Thomas A. Marcus. I picked up his The Words Between the Spaces, which apparently he co-authored with someone else, and I look forward to reading that. Vogelin, which I still need to read, on political religions. I picked up Christopher Caldwell's The Age of Entitlement, America Since the 60s. Hopefully you guys can see that all right. I expect that will be a quick and easy read. I just have to get to it. Dr. Otto Pohl recommended to me apparently the academic standard for thinking on the subject in terms of frameworks, which is Ethno-Nationalism, The Quest for Understanding by Walker Connor. I ordered it on his recommendation, but I have yet to read it. And this is one, I can't remember where I found this. Maybe somebody told me about it. Maybe I just tripped over it, in one of those moments when I shouldn't have been on Amazon, and ended up buying something. This is Weapons of Mass Migration, Forced Displacement, Coercion, and Foreign Policy. Interesting book. I look forward to reading it. It's all about using populations, mass migration, as a weapon. Interesting. Yes, Cornell University Press. I look forward to reading it. Kelly and Greenhill. So that gave us some time for people to get into the house. I thank you all for joining me. I'm very happy to see all of you. I'm sorry it's been a while since I have done a live stream. As most of you will know, I don't do well trying to talk and follow a train of thought and follow the comments at the same time. But I will come back to the comments eventually, particularly for the Ask Me Anything portion of our discussion, or of my monologue. And if in particular you have a question for me and you want me to see it, then please do the at Semiagog at the opening of it so that it will stand out for me. So I see all kinds of people in the house. We got a couple of moderators: Zed Dez, John Ski. If I've missed some other ones, I do apologize, but I'm glad you all are here. Wield the wrench if there are any pricks out making a nuisance of themselves. And so I'm going to go over some random thoughts of mine that are turning out to be not so random. And then we'll have an Ask Me Anything. So random thoughts that are not so random. What on earth does Oliver mean by that? Well, if you want to understand where I'm coming from, it would be useful at some point for you to go and check out a clip that I did in the past. It is on inspiration. You can find it in the back catalog on the Semiagog channel, certainly on the YouTube one. I don't know if the BitChute one goes back that far with content, but in that clip, I talk about ways to become methodical with your pursuit of inspiration. And one of the techniques that I mentioned, or the primary one that I mentioned there, is that you take cards. You have little index cards. Tim told me about this years ago, and then I started using it more extensively when writing screenplays, but then I adapted it and used it as I'm about to lay out, which is where you write down whatever idea comes to you, and you just, when you get some sort of strange inspiration, scribble down whatever you need to on the card in order to encapsulate the idea, and then throw it into a box. And over time, you'll just get in the habit of keeping these cards and a pencil around, and you write your idea down, and then you throw it in the box with these cards. And it's important that you do it like this, that you don't use, for example, your note-taking function on your cell phone Thief of Peace Black Mirror device. Put them on paper, on cards, because there's something about the speed at which you can write with a stylus and the rest that has to do with allowing the thoughts to really come forth. Anyway, you put them in a box, come back to them, for example, after a month, and you'll find you have all these ideas you threw in there. And then you can, for example, put them up on a corkboard or one of these dry erase panels that's also magnetic, in which case you can use the really powerful little mini magnets and stick the pieces of paper up. It's important that you do so because you can rearrange them spatially. And I, at least, have seen on many occasions that the ideas that I throw in there, that I take out to sort at intervals, even though I didn't realize they were connected at the time, it emerges when you begin to lay them out that they are. And it becomes a way to communicate with your subconscious, if you will. We don't have to get into the details of whether the model of subconscious or whatever is most appropriate. You take my meaning. Anyway, I bring that up because I had thrown a few ideas down in the course of talking with a friend of mine on the phone this last week. And man, it's always good to talk to good friends, smart friends, conversation. I will take refuge in it in my dotage. Anyway, I'm blessed in that respect. I get to speak to Tim as well as these other friends of mine that are quite good. Anyway, these ideas came to me, so I was scribbling them down actually as I'm just talking to him on the phone. And I thought, wow, these are some interesting things that could sort of link together, and they're tied to things that I've thought about in the past. And it became clear that they related all one to another, which is coming back around to that whole business of putting the different ideas on cards and then seeing how they come to life. So there are really three different themes here, and I'll try to link them together. I think that the ideas I set forth will in and of themselves be interesting, but if you want to go meta, if you will, on this whole exercise, then you can kind of see how these ideas came to me, and I captured them. And then I realized later that they're actually linked in ways that, you end up with a whole greater than the sum of its parts. Not to sound too satisfied with myself, but I do think it is the case. So the first idea we have here, that I've been playing with, and I've talked about it a number of times on this channel before, is this division between the civil and the martial. I apologize if some of the people who have joined us this evening are not familiar with this. I talk about it in a bunch of places. I can't go deeply into it, but the basic idea is that we have two parallel tracks, and one is the civic, and the other one is the martial, and we have associated legal frameworks that go with them. And to me, that is interesting because, how shall I say this? It casts a rather odd light on the notion that we have to be either atomistic and focused on civil liberties, which is glossed as being atomized individuals who can't cooperate, right? Or crisis collectivization. And there are a lot of people who say we have to get rid of this form of government over here that has a focus on civil liberties and English common law, and we have to go for black wool garments that are a little bit itchy, and we have to march in step in order to deal with whatever the crisis is. When in fact, part of our cultural technology is these two parallel tracks, the one being the civic and the martial. Anyway, I've talked about that before. If you want to find it, there are clips about it, and titles should lead you to where you need to go. However, there is one specific dimension of this that's very, very interesting to me, and that's what we're going to start with, which is innovation on a war footing. And much as we see the legal system that we're governed by change when we're faced with crisis, similarly, we see a renewed interest in innovation and insight and seeing what was hidden in the negative space, or ferreting out some new feature of something that we should have thought more carefully about in the past, but we were just too complacent to think about. Now we're forced, because of being in extremis, whatever the crisis is, to go back and dig into, this or that, or, once I thought about something, maybe we could revisit that in order to make shit work. And to give you a tangible example, I can't remember what it's called. It's like the Hakukubuk or Habubukuk or some shit. But basically, there was a problem during World War II with where German U-boats were taking down huge amounts of our shipping, and part of the area in the North Atlantic where it was worse was where we couldn't get aircraft because of how far away the bases were and fuel and the rest. So somebody came up with an idea of an aircraft carrier made out of ice, and it was going to be like 4 times bigger than the biggest aircraft carriers that exist today. It never did work out. They wanted to add wood chips or something to the ice, and they were basically going to turn an iceberg into an aircraft carrier by shaping it. And they did some experiments because it was wartime, and they needed to be looking at every possibility. They needed a solution. And yet there's all kinds of it's almost paradoxical, because what happens when you've got wartime crisis is that you lock down with hierarchy and the rest. You tend to go for more conservative things like a hierarchical chain of command. Innovations like democracy get dispensed with in large part because of how inefficient they are for decision making when you need to quickly assess what's going on and make a decision, etc. And yet, during war, we have this need for innovation. crisis response requires exploring all the options. And so it's interesting for me to think about that, because in addition to these two parallel tracks of the civil and martial, we have ways culturally that we approach solving problems. So under normal circumstances, you wouldn't, for example, be able to give people hydrochloroquine for treating the symptoms, as a therapeutic for coronavirus, but then they just dispense with it because it could work. And a part of you has to ask, a part of me anyway, has to ask, well, what price do we pay for dispensing with the expediency in favor of, conservative attention to all the things that could go wrong, and risk management, risk mitigation, and the rest? Like, what do we lose by not unleashing ourselves in that way? And so you see kind of the emergence of an idea and a cultural inertia that resists that idea coming in. And we see it all the time. Like Tim used to talk about, for example, still does on occasion, how in academia, I know Otto Pohl will understand much of this, certainly from having experienced it directly, I don't doubt, though he went to a much better school than most. The need to pile up hundreds of thousands, millions of little dust motes, of little grains of sand, in order to satisfy the horizontal thinkers, so that you can sort of create this pyramid with its background and its support, its proper citations, and you can prove in your introduction that you've mastered the field before you dare to step in and attempt to introduce some new thought into the process. So you have to raise a pyramid of all this other bullshit and background in order to place one new grain of sand atop it. And that's the institutional inertia that I'm talking about, the resistance to innovation. And we see that top-down imposition, kind of fighting with the spontaneous emergence of an insight that wants to come from the bottom and go up. And a friend of mine has done some PhD work on it. He's an ethnomusicologist, and we talk about this often. I don't fully get his theory, and in some ways I may butcher it, but he's got a basic idea about religious experiences, and when they're genuine, when they lead to states of consciousness that are transformative, and they happen based on something related to our religious instinct, certainly still things that we can explain and grapple with through neurology, biology, neurobiology. So I don't want to say it's just all out there, whatever. There's, it's not simply something that's metaphysical and assumes these unreal things. We can measure tangibly in certain ways how the brain works when it undergoes a religious experience or whatever. But these are thoughts I'm not fully done with, I should hasten to say. So I apologize for how I'm wandering about. But there's a genuine kind of religious experience, and there are some ways that we can measure it in terms of brain activity, or at least begin to understand it in that way. And it results in cultural changes. And when so imagine you've got like a prophet. He's really got to go out into the desert and have an experience that really does transform him in order to change his own behavior, and for other people to kind of catch wind of the change of state that individual experienced, and for whatever insights or vision that came with that to spread culturally. And that would be an example of a bottom up, right? The top and bottom, they have limited application. You could say also center and periphery, or real versus unreal. There's a lot of ways that you could tackle it. Anyway, the point is that there are spontaneous things that happen. Even if you seek them, they're spontaneous, which is why we have the whole Baroque filigree on top of all of this, having to do with grace. And it's not by man's effort alone, but spontaneous eruptions of religious inspiration that yield a change of consciousness, in turn change the culture. And you can think of that as bottom up. But astroturfing, coming from the top down, is what we see when the institution wants to enforce a normative framework. I hope I'm not losing everybody. This isn't the only thing I'm going to be talking about tonight, but basically, if you look at Catholicism, you have things like Vatican II that almost destroyed the church, frankly, from what I can tell, because it removed some important elements, vestigial important elements of the Mass that people could participate in by hearing it uttered in Latin. You know, they make it in the vernacular of these different places where they perform the Mass, and so they think they make it rational, and in some sense they take away what was mystical and somehow was on the border of coming into words but escaped it, you know, when you participate listening to a Mass in Latin, for example. That's the top down. That's like social engineering. But the bottom up in Catholicism is lay brotherhoods, where you have, for example, Hermandad or whatever, and this all again goes to much of my friends' doctoral research. You have spontaneous emergence of culture-generating experiences. Okay, and you know what? That's probably as far as I need to take that, because I just wanted to show how the genuine individual personal experience can shape culture, and yet how there's an institutional inertia that pushes back on that and makes it more difficult. And that's in a religious context where, you know, some prophet has a crazy vision and comes back and everybody wants to follow him because they can smell that he's smoldering with, you know, coming into presence of the Godhead or whatever. But it also works for innovation and insight. You know, neurobiologically, there are all kinds of lights go off in your brain that would show up on an fMRI, presumably, when you have that experience. There's also a reward experience that comes when you think of a great new idea. I know it happens. I mean, maybe they're not great new ideas, but for me, they sure feel that way. And when you hit it, you're like, yes! Like, it connected. You're like, I got it, yes. There's a dopamine hit, and there's a reward. And that experience pushes the individual to continue towards that which just escapes apprehension, comprehension, or understanding. And yet, we've got all this institutional pressure against it. And so I want to come back around to this idea of innovation on a war footing. It's almost as though we're forced to have our hands tied behind our backs, much like a physician who, based upon regulations, is not allowed to go out there and experiment with new medical treatments. And I get why the tension's there. I understand that you have to come from both sides with these things. But there's something about a relationship between the inspiration that an inventor feels. There must have been something driving Tesla on, right, to chase these different ideas. And I can't remember which ancient Greek philosopher it was that said, Eureka, you know, I have found it. It's probably Archimedes. Anyway, it signals the reward. When you figure something out, the light in the room changes. It kind of gets a golden cast to it. Anyway, for me it does. And yet we have this inertia that pushes against it. And so if you look at the model of wartime versus peacetime, and how a crisis event will trigger the transition from the peacetime to the wartime, and once that happens, the rules change. Now we're in a state of unrestricted warfare, where our wires have been cut, so they're trying to boil the frog. It's low-intensity conflict at all times, in all places, in all ways, and so we don't switch over to our footing of crisis response. And I just have to wonder how that affects our ability as a culture to produce. See, we've got an impetus collectively, if I can say it, or we have a group strategy, if I can even say that. Some of the people more knowledgeable about biology and evolution will come in and slap me around for misuse of the term or the fact that it doesn't apply or whatever. But you take my point. Generally speaking, there's some way that we have figured out, in large part, as groups, particularly in the West, part of our crisis response is to pull back on the barriers that hedge us round, that tend to favor the conservative, so that too much innovation doesn't throw us off balance, right? So, what's the other thing? I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes here as well. You've got the risk of innovations, and you've got the safety of limitations, as I was talking about, collective versus individual. And I guess this is the point. Yeah, that's what I wanted to get at, was the way in which we pull back, we remove the barriers that hedge around the innovation when we're faced with crisis. We're faced with crisis all the time, though, now through unrestricted warfare, but in large part, we keep our peacetime hedges up, which favor risk mitigation rather than unleash the attitude of innovation, which in some sense I think is related to religious inspiration, at least insofar as innovation, invention, inspiration, they all have, something's coming in. Is it an annunciation? Is it the spiritus, right, that enters us? Anyway, we have a situation where there is a balance between the risk averse, risk mitigation side of things that tends to be conservative and oriented towards the collective, and then the individual sort of mold breaking innovation and free spiritedness, and their intention, because it's not just seesawing one way or the other. They continue to coexist, and there are ways in which, in a healthy culture, they shift at different times to emphasize more the innovation or more the restriction. And so this will bring me to the second point. I've covered the crazy ideas going all over the place with inspiration that I'm playing with. I'm sorry that it is not better organized, but when it's a free association stream like this, or almost free association, that's what you get. Hopefully some of you still find it worth your while. Now we've got the business of the culture where these two things, and now moving from my first subject, which is inspiration, to my second subject, which is signals warfare. Remember, these things came to me independently, but now I'm seeing that there are bridges between them for the meta part of our discussion, which is where we can see how these ideas that I referenced, the cards at the beginning of our discussion, and how they come together, and you see somehow the subconscious relates them, and then you get more innovation. See, this is nested. There are all kinds of layers to this that interrelate, at least for me. All I ask of from my viewers is patience. Okay, so signals warfare. How do we get from inspiration to signals warfare? I talked about how we have this tension in the culture, top-down versus bottom-up, or more direct personal experiences towards, reified abstractions out on the periphery. Anyway, they're in tension, and what helps us to understand how to shift the emphasis in that tension in order to be successful is being able to read the signals. I referenced that earlier when I talked about the wires are cut and the frog is being boiled. We've got the situation where you would normally recognize that you're in crisis mode, and you would lock down civil law, and you would activate military law, and in certain cases martial law, in order to deal with the threat. But because it's kept low level under unrestricted warfare, they're trying to boil our frog. What's really happening there? Well, by keeping it below the threshold where, above or below our flicker fusion threshold, where it all comes together as a seemingly smooth image that we can register in front of us, by keeping it below the threshold that would trigger our crisis response, basically they're keeping it below the level that we recognize the signal, which is the threat signal. So anyway, that inspiration idea and how the culture is tense around it and how it would tune itself, like if we're under threat, we would back off again, remove the hedges from thinking, like Trump saying, we don't have time to wait, let's just go ahead and do some tests with hydroxychloroquine, right? That would be triggered. And yet in many cases, we feel as though we're not under threat, and so we're not taking advantage of that survival ability that's built in, that's encoded within us. Anyway, so that jumps us over to signals warfare, because what prevented what I was just talking about is screwing with the signal by intentionally. It's like the slow blade penetrates the shield, right, from Dune. It doesn't crystallize and harden around it and form more resistance because it's moving through so slowly. And all of this interest in signaling is why I got into to semiotics. And there's a lot going on with attempting to relate human use of signs and our traditions of signaling, and even things that are instinctive or instinctual about signaling. I look at all those things together because I want to form a complete picture. I want a grand unified theory of signification. So I've been looking at people who have sort of advanced that project. And for those who might be interested in that sort of thing, you can go and check in the back catalog. There is a playlist on Marx and Marx studies. And I will be developing a semiotics of nationalism that I will write up and publish as soon as I can get to it, that will be based on a lot of the thinking that is in those clips. But anyway, I'm going to make it more tangible because you guys have very, very kindly stuck with me through all my rambling abstractions. I'm going to start using further examples that should make this more clear. At least I hope so. Signals disruption. We've been talking about how the culture gets tricked over into a state of war if it receives a signal, but if it doesn't, you can maintain this low intensity, degrading, in more senses than one, assault on the culture. And there are a number of ways that they play games with our signals, and that's what I want to jump to now, is this idea of signals warfare. Then we'll jump to attack the future, and then we'll do Ask Me Anything for the balance. So what do I want to talk about here? Well, one is, and this ties back to my whole thing about Marx and animal marking and a grand unified theory about it. I think it's important to look at how we respond to signals in the same way that animals do with disorientation. But I can't get into this here. You can go to the playlist to find out more about that, the playlist on Marx studies. But I'm going to take a look at like COVID-19, right? That's what we're all dealing with right now. And we look to the information in our environment, just like an animal does out in the woods, as a basis to get oriented. We want to know if we're far from our home and near dangerous borders. Are we on a path that we know well, so we can move much more quickly, anticipating what's going to happen? It's like when you drive from home to work. When you've done it many times, there's a lot of stuff that you can do almost unconsciously. But when it's a new environment, there's more risk involved with it. And we've seen with animal behavior that when animals know their territory, they're much, much more inclined to defend it. And they do so in interest-specific competition much more successfully when they're on their own ground, particularly when they're near hot points like a nest or, a wallow or a child-rearing spot, where their young are kept, I should say. So there's a parallel between how we orient and how animals orient, and we read the signs in our environment. Get that? See what I did there? Read the signs. Hopefully all this will one day knit together, not only for all of you, but for me as well. We have to orient in our environment, and if we can't trust the information in our environment, then we cannot make determinations with survival value, because the signal-to-noise ratio is all cacked up. And that's what I think we're seeing with COVID-19. Like, look at the business where they're talking about testing. Got to do testing. Hammer Trump about testing. Well, it would seem that they're looking for more information. They want to test, right? They just want to know. But if you want a perfect, not perfect, but a fair example of how subversive and insidious all of this is, you can see that to the extent that they push for COVID testing without properly contextualizing it, they're actually creating a lying signal. If you don't know that the more cases that you discover, as anyone with any sense knows, right, the more cases you discover to form a denominator under the numerator, which is the number of deaths, the death rate goes down. But you see the sleight of hand that's going on here? They push for testing. They don't explain what that really means in the mainstream, propaganda vomitorium, filth delivery tubes, right? So under color of attempting to find out more about what's going on and inform the public, they actually inflame concern because people see these numbers spiking of, oh my God, more and more cases, when they've been falsely, all of it has been falsely positioned so that you think as the cases go up, there's more cause for concern. But in terms of the case numbers, as opposed to the death numbers, the concern goes down as the number goes up. And that is where it's like lighting more campfires when you don't have soldiers. It's like false flags. It's like putting on the enemy's uniforms to drive far behind their lines. It's signals warfare. I mean, which we can see with animal behavior, with scent signaling, chemical communication among animals with things called alamones. Look it up if you have never heard about it. So COVID-19 is one example, like with Worldometer. They come in, I used to follow their site because they had more reasonable shit than the Johns Hopkins website with just, blood splatters everywhere that are supposed to terrify you. We are scientists, right? Which means we want some granularity, literal granularity, where these little dots get small enough to where I can actually read something meaningful based on their concentrations, and instead you're giving me giant circles of red that cover the entire map that are supposed to trigger the same response into me that seeing those red dots on the face of a person's skin would trigger, right? It's a parallel. It looks like a splotchy, mottled, disease-riddled surface on screen to trigger the same responses that would happen naturally if we were to see that on someone's skin. We would recoil. These fucking games. Anyway, I go over to Worldometer because it's a little better, and you can look at death graphs and case increases and all of this sort of thing. And they've been pulling that shit out. Every time I go back there, they've pulled something else out there so that the only data that you can see is something that's alarming. That's signals warfare. And what it does is it fucks with our ability to make a determination of whether to flip over into crisis response. We're being frog boiled over here where we're not supposed to respond because they're keeping it low intensity, and then an attack that isn't an attack is amplified to 11 on the on what's his name's fucking amplifier. God, I'm so old, man. I can't even remember that. What's it called? Who's the guy? What's the guy name of the guy with the fucking amplifier that goes to 11? Anyway, you can see what's going on with the signals warfare, and it's a problem. And we also see it online, which is where a lot of this is going on too, because people want to share whatever information they might be able to get their hands on. And so you think you're going to go to social media, and that's where you see what I call the fish garth. The fish garth, the fish fence that we're all pushed into by the current, and the current appears in the comments sections. The current, an algorithmic selection on what content flows and what doesn't is nothing but a set of locks on a river. It's a current, and it's designed to push people into fish traps. It's more signals warfare. So we've got another one that will allow us to jump over to some further considerations here. Yes, Spinal Tap, thank you. And what's the name of the guy whose amplifier actually goes to 11? The dude. What is the name? Is it Nigel? Okay, fuck, it's Nigel. I wanted to say it too, but now that whole memory is overlaid with Nigel Farage's swampy cough. So yeah, another form of information warfare that they have in play, which is going to provide for us the transition from synchronic signals warfare, which means signals warfare that's happening across a territory at the same moment. It's going to allow us to jump over to diachronic signals warfare, which is signals warfare along a line. And that is crime statistics. We can't get crime statistics. We can't get accurate crime statistics about who the fuck is doing what, because they want to keep their categories out. The same people who are so eager to put categories in want to keep them out in certain instances. And I wonder if there's a pattern. I wonder if that happens to go one way rather than another. Yes, crime statistics. Once again, we see a situation we can't read the signal. So we don't know whether to go into crisis response mode. We don't know whether to go into into our amplified innovation that becomes more risky but yields potentially a greater reward. It's driven by our need to deal with a particular crisis because we can't take a reading because the wires have been cut. You know, there's somebody up on the bridge with the speaking tube, right? And there's someone down in the engine room and they're trying to talk, and in the middle is a crafty little fucker sticking a sock into the speaking tube. And it happens all over the place. Or they cut a hole and they stick a trombone up to it and they start blowing through it. It's all signals warfare. And precisely to the degree that our communication becomes increasingly mediated by the platforms available to us, it becomes more completely riddled with opportunities for all this false information to be introduced. So it's crazy making the more you think about it. And you have to almost pull your face away from the socket of the blue-eyed whore of Babylon with her 256 million candy clown colors, as I put it in a poem, the glowing monitor. Here I am, even at this moment, being tanned by it, watching scrolling text go by that in some fashion acts as a stand-in. I can't remember fucking English tonight. Acts as a proxy for actual face-to-face communication. So crime statistics. We can see how it leads to problems with our abilities to make decisions, make determinations about how to respond to a crisis. Or, I mean, it's a wrecker's beacon. You're trying to helm the goddamn ship and you have your hand on the tiller, and out in the distance you see this light in the fog. Except it's not the fucking lighthouse. So, from crime statistics, let's take a look at another way that this warfare is being waged against us. I mean, really, the big meta umbrella on all of this is unrestricted warfare, because we've got questions of how our culture responds when we talked about inspiration and top-down versus bottom-up. With signals warfare, we got into some more of the details about how the beast communicates within itself, a nation, a group of people, groups operating within a territory. That's all synchronic. But there is a dimension to it that is diachronic, where we're attacked across time. And I'm going to throw out a few examples of that. And the first of those will be George Soros going after district attorneys. Why is George Soros going after district attorneys? I mean, obviously, you think district attorney, you make a decision about prosecution and the rest, right? So, okay, so he wants some control over decisions about who gets prosecuted and who doesn't, right? But surely there's more that we should understand about that. There must be some game, some prize at the end of this thought process that will make the game worth the candle. Well, now think about it. We understand that they're like, don't prosecute criminals, right? Let's for example say that if it's under $900 for theft, then we don't even need to get a police officer involved at all. So, you know, you get the kind of clips that we're seeing across the internet, if they can be trusted, because it's all mediated, but I think they can be, which show large numbers of youths going into places and just, like, you know, seizing everything off of a coat rack and just walking out with it, just ripping up iPads and heading out to the car because no one's going to do anything because it's under $900, because the district attorneys, one of them a notable one being in San Francisco, have decided that, you know, the revolution is now, comrades. But there's more to it than that, I think. And this is going to take us from synchronic to diachronic with the whole trajectory of how this works. Attacking across time. Before we really dig into that, let's and that's the juicy bit, which I will yield. It'll be like dessert, and then we can move on to Ask Me Anything. But when you look at the stuff that Soros has going on, one of the important things that happens is that you have There are two things that I have to cover here. The first is that there are gates, right? If George Soros wants to do something, and he certainly does because he's chosen to put money into DAs. I mean, the decision was made. It was made for a reason. Money, the little knob on the money tap, does not get turned unless someone sees a goal. And he said DAs. Well, I thought to myself, well, what happens here? Because, the classic old thing was control the district attorney type figure, and then you're in a position to, for example, go after somebody if you really want to and prosecute them. And there is that, but it just doesn't offer enough at scale, right? You can get a lot more for your dollar by paying someone to help another person have an accident in the bathtub, right? Than having to pay all the people involved with setting something up to put them in prison. I mean, exceptions apply, I'm sure. If you want to make a big spectacle out of it, whatever, sure. But across the nation to go after district attorneys, so I'm like, well, it couldn't be based on prosecution because that has a throughput. It's governed, right? It's gated. It has limits. The throughput for prosecution is limited by the capacity of the courts and the capacity of the prisons. And so then I just flipped it. I said, okay, well, you got another direction you can come from. And that's who you don't prosecute. And you just sort of open, let loose the hounds of war, or in this case, the hounds of acting out bullshit and low-level crime that just sort of gnaws at the roots of the social contract like the worm at the roots of Yggdrasil, right? It's, you just got a lot more bandwidth. By choosing who not to prosecute, you're not limited by the throughput of the courts and the prisons. You see? And you just generally degrade the social contract. That's one aspect of this that I wanted to mention, but there's one that's a little bit more diachronic that takes place over time. In our justice system, a thing has to be documented to exist. There are versions of this that we see in academia too. It all comes from the religions of the book and the innovation of the register, the tally, the account keeping, the clay tablets, the linear B, the scribes keeping track of ingots of copper and tin. It comes out of that. It's the reckoning, the red column and the black column. All of these. Anyway, I'm getting a little bit carried away. The point is that in our legal system, a thing does not exist unless it's documented. And so by no longer prosecuting low-level offenders, you're basically losing the background that the courts would otherwise have as a basis to make a decision about how to apply sentences. So, think about it. If you're on YouTube and they don't like you, they've given me a permanent first strike. It used to lapse. In fact, when I got it, I continuously received dates at which it would eventually lapse. And yet, after that date, the strike stayed on, and then they finally removed the notice that it would lapse, and they just put it there forever. So I'm perpetually in a situation where I've already got one strike. And anybody on the channel who's had their warning knows that. So think about it coming from the other direction. Again, signals warfare, but now taking place across time. You've removed the backstory. Because remember, nothing gets seen in the world of law unless it's documented. Someone must attest to it. There must be a testament to it. It must be attested in writing. If you've got video, if you've got a recording, if you've got witnesses. And yet what's happened is all this crap that the young kids get up to, it's not there anymore. So when they do it later, it will seem like a first offense. You also effectively remove the ability to nip it in the bud when it is so critical early on. So again, this points out the way that they do it across a span of time, longitudinally, as they like to say. And we've got a new point, and this is going to be our pivot to talking about attacking the future, the third of our subjects. Remember, the first one was inspiration, top down, bottom up, signals within a culture in order to react to a crisis. Second one is signals warfare, because if you can disrupt the culture's ability to react in a crisis, then you can bring them down. Boil the frog, right? And we just looked at some ways that they get up to their signals warfare with COVID-19, with signal versus noise in terms of the current of comments and the rest that I talked about with online communication that is entirely mediated. Well, now, with the example of young people whose criminal record is no longer visible there as a basis to inform decision making on the part of the courts. And yeah, I get it, the courts are wrong. Lots. They're just screwed. The things they get away with are absolutely ridiculous. But nevertheless, I would say they probably get it right 70% of the time in our court system. There are people who do need to be incarcerated. There are people who've committed crimes, and for all that it's not the be-all, end-all, the best our culture has come up with at present is imprisoning them. So about 70% of the time it does work, I guess. But now, the very things that system relies upon to be useful, even for that 70% of the time, are being compromised, which again degrades and subverts the basis for our social contract. And they see it across time. And in this example, we can see where it's with young people. As I said, this is the point at which you can get in early and maybe actually do something about it. You know, with a lot of young people you can't, because some folks are just bad, born bad. But many of them aren't. And sometimes you get lucky and you can change the direction of that. And sometimes putting a little bit of fear into them does apparently work. But we can't do that anymore because Soros, among other people, has worked to subvert district attorneys who then, set the standard within their domain of influence for who gets prosecuted and why. Now we don't have that background. And so they sort of attacked our young people. And if you don't want to call them our young people, let's say at least young people within our country, if not our nation, which creates more problems. They've gone after our young people. Which brings us to this whole idea of attacking the future. Now, one of the reasons why I think Soros went after the district attorneys was because he's got hardcore, sharp-ass people thinking for him. And he is a cunning player himself, no doubt. And there are many others. And so he chose this as a thing that is generally not policed as closely as other things. If you want to focus on the big things that matter a lot, then you have to make decisions about the disposition of your forces and your relative emphasis here versus there, because shit's finite in at least this level of the real world. And so you can't, for example, you want to defend or contest congressional seats, then you can't really pay attention to things as much like district attorneys. And, Soros probably looked at it and said, well, if everybody's going after this, let me go after this. And what will it yield for us long term? What could it yield for us long term? Long term. Long term. What could it yield for us long term? Attack the future. And here I will point you all to a clip that's in the back catalog on my channel called On Perspective, because it will provide some useful background for all of this. But I won't get into all of that here. I'll just say go find it. It's called On Perspective, and it's actually fairly good. I don't know. Some parts of it probably won't hold up as well. I did it some years back, but you can find it and it will give you context for this. The important thing is that if you're attacking the future, your target is in the present. I mean, your activity will take place in the present even if your target is in the future. And the focus of your attention in order to affect the future will be things that you are shaping now in hopes of reaping the benefit of whatever it is that you're up to at some distant point in the future. And that naturally underscores the importance of paying attention to young people. Young people. If you want to attack the future, you attack the children. There was something, that I was trying to say it in some roundabout way, and it was Nick or someone else who came across and was just like, what you're trying to say, Oliver, is that you can have it either good, fast, or cheap, right? And so when you have limited resources, like for example, if you're out of office, or the people you paid for are in large part out of office, which is a situation that people like Soros are facing, then, what can you do in the present, right? Your hands are kind of tied at present because somebody stole a march on you or did something unexpected or so-and-so got into office, so you can't do really what you wanted to do here and now. But if you want to keep it on based on the rules of unrestricted warfare, which is to fuck with them all the time, at every level, in all ways, preferably in a fashion that won't trigger their crisis response, which allows you to just punch them gently and constantly without any respite. But if you have to, you can do it even in such a fashion that it finally comes to their attention. Look at the signals intelligence, while we're on the subject, involved in the grooming gangs continuing to operate. Again, screwing with the alarm signals within the organism through signals warfare. Anyway, what was I talking about? Attack the future. Attacking the future, in large part, entails going after the kids because they're the ones that are going to be around in present. And by a happy accident of biology, they happen to be very receptive and open. And by a happy accident of biology, they tend to be rebellious as adolescents because they've gotten to the age where biology says you're supposed to reject your parents so that some incremental developments can occur biologically for the group rather than being frozen in stasis, kind of like the dead hand of the past transposed over to the cultural realm. If you want to understand more about my view on that, you can find a previous clip entitled Progressivism is Weaponized Adolescence, I think it is called. It's another one in the back catalog. They go after our kids. I mean, not my kids. I don't have any children. That would sound just ridiculous. Our kids, people's children are the target of this. I don't happen to have any of my own. And there are a number of ways that this manifests. I've got a couple of examples that I laid out here. Let me find them. One of them is that what we saw with the Soros business, with the district attorney programs, and the fact that, for example, you disappear the background records that would let you know that this kid is starting to go wrong, and to step in and intervene. So you kind of tend to foster the likelihood that, borderline kids who kind of could go either way will go rotten. That's one example. Another one, again, with children, is using migrant children, prioritizing migrant children in order to bring them into the country, because they'll be the future too. Who's going to respond to the children coming in? Look at my recent clip on public health. It's like 1 or 2 back, where I discuss the use of images, relationships, the manipulation of image sets within the psyche of a people in order to exploit them, with particular attention to children. Migrant children is another example. So young people who are borderline, who could be criminal, or maybe might not end up that way, but they've set up a situation that fosters them going bad, bringing in migrant children with an eye towards the future. Again, this is all about attack the future. And then take a look at Greta Thunberg. Again, get the kids freaked out that climate change is going to come and destroy everything, and they'll have no future. They have to push back against the older generation. Again, progressivism, as I said in that other clip, is weaponized adolescence. They've got to weaponize one age cohort against another. Attack the future. Create what you want to see in the future now, and exploit your skill in envisioning something so far away so as to yield victory for you without any real exertion being required. If you see it far enough in the future, remember good, fast, cheap, that model, right? Even if you don't have that much in the way of resources, if you're willing to do it slowly enough across time, if you're willing to attack the future by targeting the children, then, the sky's the limit. You can make just about anything happen patiently, or so their reckoning has thus far gone, they being the them. And Greta Thunberg is not the first. For those who aren't aware of it, many people who have been watching my channel for a while know that I often hammer this, but Severn Cullis Suzuki was doing the exact same shit in the 90s. Just go look up Severn Cullis Suzuki. She does an address to the UN about how everything on Earth is going to be underwater and because children, and it's exactly the same thing that you get with Greta Thunberg. So 3 examples there: migrant children being prioritized, young people whose future could have gone either way being screwed by subversion of our district attorney offices in the United States. And we see this abroad too, right? Certain groups require special attention. They have special privileges. And so we're not supposed to enforce the law in the same way. And we have a word. We call that spoiling children. It means your fruit will end up rotten. Rotten. Useless. There was a sticker. A friend of mine, I always used to hang with art school kids, and so back in those days it was all stickers all the time. I'm glad actually to see stickers come back. And he did this one sticker, and I won't go into what image was on it, but the caption said, "We will disease your eggs." Anyway, it was a great sticker. So some examples of how they go after children. And now I'm going to wrap this, because we've seen how these 3 elements, to return to the meta theme at the beginning, with the cards and inspiration and how you lay these ideas out and you think that they're unrelated. Well, these ones came randomly to me, seemingly randomly. And yet this notion of inspiration, of signals warfare, of attacking the future, it emerges that they can all be linked together. I just want to close with this sort of one thing here, and it's good. We're at a halfway point. I actually managed this somehow from 9 to 10 p.m. Then we'll have from 10 to 11 for Ask Me Anything. Think about this whole business of pedophilia and Pizzagate and perverts going after children. Think about that. Now, I'm not saying that there is not a perfectly easy to understand surface dimension of this, which is actually people who are sexually attracted to children, abusing and exploiting them. There is that dimension. It always exists in all times and in all places. And maybe it's more out of hand now than it was in the past. I don't know. But I'll tell you one thing that I do know. If a group or groups, and as those who followed my channel for a long time know, I favor groups. If groups were in fact attacking our future by targeting our children, and even attacking our future by targeting the children of other groups in order to create, drive wedges and foment conflict, it would seem likely to me that for those people who didn't notice it, because it didn't cross the threshold of their awareness, because it didn't trigger a crisis response, because all the signals that we should have relied upon in order to understand that something was being done to us were muffled, were muted. Right? Still, somehow I feel as though I would sense it. Still, somehow I would feel that something was being done. And I've had enough exposure to human beings in the course of my lengthening lifespan to see that even when they don't know it, some part of them does get it. It's like a woman trusting her nose, right? Now, they've been wrong spectacularly sometimes, but I'd give them an even 80 to 90%. They know it. When they don't know it, they know it. And they know they don't know it, but they know it. Anyway. It seems to me that in such circumstances, people would have a response. They would just have a tension in them. They would increasingly begin feeling that their children were being targeted, that people were trying to exploit their children. You see what I'm saying? Yes, there are cases where people are actually targeting children, pedophiles, etc. But even more so, it would become a cultural theme. The sense that our future is being attacked would have to manifest, insofar as it crossed the threshold of our awareness, in a growing certainty that our children are under attack. Because metaphorically, that's exactly what's going on. Because if you want to attack the future, you'll always attack children. They're most susceptible, they're most plastic, their minds can be formed and shaped most easily. What's most important, we're consistently told, is that they not be homeschooled. Apparently, children are increasingly like our money, which we're told is ours, but isn't ours. Try leaving the United States with more than $10,000 of it in cash, and you will swiftly find out. I don't recommend that. I'm sorry, I should say that. Don't do that, because you will swiftly find out that your money is not yours. And for all the people who are upset about things like homeschooling, apparently your children are not yours. And so, ladies and gentlemen, lest I descend into a pit of despair and lose my native sense of humor, that wraps up my sense of humor, reinforced with my apple juice. That wraps up the opening portion of our discussion, where I covered these three ideas. I thank everyone who has stuck with us thus far for joining us. And now I will turn to questions on Ask Me Anything. Now, you guys know it takes a little while for me to get my shit together with the comments section. As a matter of fact, just to be safe, I probably should not go backwards in time. So I am going to be looking for questions now. Yes, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, indeed. What do we have here? All right. Apologies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm forced to do a major shifting of gears to jump into the world of the comments section, which is very different from where I normally live. Philosophicat, hello Philosophicat, welcome, asks, what do you think is the best way to fight the current tyranny? Well, that's interesting. I think the best way to fight it is to attack the future. But you don't have to do it by targeting people's children. You have to do it by seeing far enough ahead to have that good, fast, cheap, model grasped, understood, and exploited by you. In a general sense, I think it comes back to that whole business of on perspective that's in that previous clip where I talk about the ability to have some goddamn perspective, to see patterns that other people don't see. It's like, if you look at oscillations along a line, right, or longitudinally, right, you've got these fast oscillations. Those are fast enough that someone with limited exposure can see the ups and downs, right? That would be like, what's a planet close to the sun, since it's Philosophicat asking, right? Mercury goes around a number of times around the sun, right? So you could be astrologically young and still register the passage of Mercury over and over again. But why is Saturn, for example, seen as the ruler of these larger overarching themes, right? There is a tide to the affairs of men. Because it's got 30 year, 60 year, I don't remember, maybe it's 30, 35 years, something like that, cycles. Only when you get old enough are you able to see cycles across that period of time. And so I think the best way is to destroy them in the future without having to become overly uncomfortable in the present, based upon our ability to extrapolate. But in order to do that, one has to fight through the signals warfare, signal to noise nonsense that we are confronted with. And that is easier said than done. And while that's a cute thing to say, very generally speaking, there are any number of specific ways that you'd have to, perhaps take entirely different approaches or think in different ways about things. Much more specifically, when it came down to the details of making things happen. Sadly, I can't get into all of those because, first off, I don't know, and second, the field of inquiry is too broad. All right, so I'm trying to figure out next question. I think I'm a little lost here, so I might forgive me if I miss something from you peeps. Okay, all right, so I'm just going to stop. My bottom on this will be the Philosophicat question we just covered. Moving forward, El Vaquero 555, a man who always believes that a 308 is superior to a 556. He asks, and welcome, sir. If you want some discussion on who is committing what crime, I'm your guy. I've tied the UCR to the U.S. Census Bureau data. Nice. Well, more of that is coming out increasingly. And yeah, you've also done some stuff on issues down at the border, if I remember correctly. People, please do go check out El Vaquero 555's channel. I recommend it. I mean, if you have the stomach for it. Some of the stuff with the border crime, I think he's got warnings up, though, for you, so, if you're likely to be triggered. King Salmonfish. Why are we on exactly the same train of thought? If you did look back, you would see I had good comments and was following. Well, I hope to see it. I know you've been following the channel for a long time. You're always a civilized person. So, yeah, I'll go back through the comments if I have time after this. John Ski. Mr. John Ski. Mr. John Ski, who along with Nick just hammered on me patiently over a period of time in my comments section and brought me around to shine light on me, hallelujah, says, do you see current humans evolving into something better or devolving into beasts? To that, I will only answer with Tim's old line about if somebody comes up to you and tells you you have only two choices, put your hand on your wallet and back up, because it will always be both and, as well as probably neither nor. Mike says, Semigog, how did you and Tim meet? Give us a little history of your friendship. I met him a little bit short of 30 years ago. I hope it's a little short of 30 years ago. Yeah. Man, you have to pay for that. Sorry, man. You have to go and watch all the old shit. I've got a bunch of people who follow the channel who have been there over the years and have heard let's slip this comment or that one and know some of the background. Or you'll have to get it when I get a live stream set up with him. The short version is that I met him when I was 19 or 20. Yeah. Because I put little pamphlets in a bookstore, in an occult bookstore. And he happened to know the owner and came across one of the pamphlets and got in touch, and we became friends. And he was kind enough to point me towards interesting books, which I then was resolute enough to subsequently read. Okay, the Schafferhund. Semigog opinions on Germany sending an invoice for 130 billion to China for corona. Initial tears between blue commies and red commies. Yeah, I don't know. You'd think it has to happen, right? But I'm having a meta problem, I shouldn't say meta. I'm having a problem with escalation of the framework for consideration of what's happening with COVID, right? Because my previous models of this group versus this group, or this coalition versus this coalition, that kind of doesn't hold up because so many people are using it in so many different ways. Then I look at the business of, okay, my other metaphor, which is COVID-19 is a fulcrum, and a bunch of people are knocking, it's like a quarterstaff fight with Little John on a bridge because they're trying to knock each other's levers off of the fulcrum, and each one wants to put their lever on the fulcrum to make the most of what is COVID-19. But the degree to which that it has advantages and disadvantages, depending on how you look at it, for almost every party, makes me think that my frame of consideration, my frame of reference, might need radical revision. So I think there will be tears. There's a lot that will be remade. It will provide a pretext for any people to do any number of things, but I'm a little bit on hold. I mean, I have been for quite some time, but I'm still short of an understanding of it that seems to me to be convincing, and therefore I cannot offer an opinion yet on the question. However, I do appreciate it. Horse Mumbler says, Semigog, do you have any particular ideas on how to concisely appeal to and inform the up-and-coming generations? No, because I'm now moving out of that sequence. There are certain things that I know, but young people, because they're looking at these shorter oscillations, which have greater importance, they haven't seen things recycled. They didn't see how square edge cars became round edge cars, became square edge cars, became round edge cars, and how the fashion cycles run. Millennials still think that they're uniquely interested in the 80s, just like I thought I was uniquely interested in the 70s. They don't understand the sequences of how you look back to reinterpret the idea and carry it forward. They haven't seen big enough cycles, and so they're exquisitely sensitive to fashion. And the form an idea takes is much more important than the content. And I am now far enough out in age that I'm not immersed in the current signs. Like I can be like, oh, I definitely want to get some 80s sunglasses, and I think the 80s look would be back, and I can sort of remember what they did in the 80s, so maybe if I dress a little like that, they'll listen. They won't, because they've tuned and retuned everything to be their own referent to set themselves apart. So I can only talk about what is timeless, and the only way to appeal to and inform them is to meet a few who are receptive to whatever it is that I or anyone else wants to say, and then rely upon them to internalize and translate it, and then it will make its way in. Which means that essentially they're gatekeepers for their own generational cohort, as it should be, and the brighter among them are going to have to come along and say, maybe this guy's worth listening to, and if they do so, then they'll make the determination whether or not to share it with their peers. Baggins, New Zealand says, Semigog, is this current lockdown scenario having a positive effect in the Middle East and Africa? I don't know what it's doing. There's not a lot that I saw. I like my little maps to go and look at the live app or live map or whatever it's called for Libya and for Syria, particularly Idlib. And all I could see in Idlib, because when I think about the Middle East, I think primarily about stuff that has to get sorted currently in Syria. It looks like south of the M4, that territory is going to be abandoned because now Turkey is fortifying just along the M4. But there are no other big major changes. I mean, there is some fighting. I haven't followed it closely. There does seem to be some fighting outside the Idlib area, up closer to the southern Turkish border. I haven't looked at it recently. I haven't seen anything new with Carlos Ghosn. In Libya, it looks like Haftar's forces have further split and contained the government of national unity or whatever it is. But I think that whatever it is that's going on with oil that I don't understand properly at present due to ignorance of too many things that I'd have to know about, like how the economic games are played with that. What was I saying? I can't fully read what's going on with the oil, but I tend to think that the game that's being played now with the dropping of oil prices, and I'm still not clear yet on cui bono, much like with COVID. I don't want to speak prematurely about that, but I'm not sure. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not sure that COVID is the most important factor. I think in terms of what's going on with the Middle East, that the oil price game that's being played right now might have more to do with that. And of course, background stuff with how energy will flow. Africa, all I've been seeing is the game that's being played where... How shall I say this? What is a way to say this that's polite? Fuck it, there isn't one. When I was young, if I wanted to have a threesome with two women, what I would do is go to one of them and tell them that the other one really liked them and had said a bunch of complimentary things about them and found them attractive. And then I would go to the other girl and tell them that the other one had said really nice things about them, and it loosened everybody up. Ultimately, you're never going to have a threesome with two women unless really they make up their own minds. And 99.99999% of the time, anything you try to do to make that happen is going to achieve exactly 180-degree the opposite results. But the technique, if they're already receptive, of sort of making them each feel good about each other, and it tends to work. Likewise, if you want to generate friction, what you can do is go to one party and say, hey, he was talking shit about you, and then go to the other party and say, yeah, he was talking shit about you. That's what I think is going on in Africa right now, and it's the only thing that I've really noticed, which is that this business of the clips going around of Chinese beating up Africans, and now of Africans retaliating with the Chinese, that seems to be a promising echo chamber. Precisely the kind of stone that one could base a delicious stone soup around. Okay. $1 trillion bill. About 15 independent tests are coming. This similar IFR now. Too much of a convergence to ignore. Yes, COVID is bad and no immunity, but not as bad as we thought. That seems more like a statement. I thank you for it. Man, something is going on with my comments. If I try to scroll, it doesn't do it smoothly, and it catches. Sorry, folks, I'm just trying to get here to questions, and I'm having real trouble with it. Okay, there we are. Maynard Frith, thoughts on Ick, Sans the Lizard Man thing? Just curious, thanks. I don't know much about that dude. I watched, I think, some of that interview that got taken off or whatever, and I found myself, I'm like, about half of it, yeah, he's got a point, but then another half of it, I'm not sure how I feel about him. And the only thing I can articulate about how I feel about him is that I'm not sure how I feel about him. All right. Mike says, it's great content, but I have to say my favorite vids are the ones when you and Tim devolve into shooting the shit, talking about the good old days in American history. I appreciate that, sir. Thank you. John Ski says, one more. You saw that report a few weeks ago about that explosion on the Iranian pipeline that they blamed on terrorists. A warning from Putin or Christians in action? I don't know. I saw it, but I have no idea. There's so many different competing parties now that at this point, beyond the only thing that I can accurately see is a blur. I know that sounds crazy, but and that's if I see anything accurately at all. But the idea is that as soon as I try to focus it up, something happens with parallax or something, and it gets all screwed. So to get as granular as, who might have been behind a pipeline explosion is beyond my powers. All right. Wow, there's a rich discussion going on over here that I have no part of. I will have to come back through here later. Okay, King Salmonfish. Hopefully I can scroll this up without it flashing past. Semicog, there's an SCP story about the universal narrative being alive. Trump narrative seizing is effective. As far as signals warfare, think of loud, red hat, big threat solver, alpha comedy. I cannot understand what you're asking. I apologize. Rephrase it, and if I catch it, I will try to sink my teeth in. But I don't know exactly what you mean. Alright, Zed Dez is telling people to tag me in the chat. Alright. I'm tempted. Oh, I'm down at the bottom now. There are no more questions. Whoa! Schafferhund says, how do you pronounce an A with the two dots over it? Whatever the Hund says, just to make sure you see it, Semigog Kim Jong-un is being reported brain dead. Well, that would be interesting. That would be interesting. If true, that would tend to confirm that maybe he really was considering Trump offers. God knows what all that could mean. All right. So yeah, I'll have to wait and see. Diane says, Semigog, are you psychic? Not any more than everyone else. Okay, hard to watch. Says, Semigog, what are some new stickers you've noticed? Were they memes and red pills? Did you count the... It's okay to be white and something else acronym I don't understand the stickers. Yeah, flyer stickers, same kind of thing. I of course saw It's Okay to Be White, and I saw Islam is right about women, disavow, and I mean it's really, I mean, a meme is a sticker. Stickers is just carrying it out into a bricks and mortar space. But I've seen some memes. Some of them are funny. So many of them go through. But I haven't really seen a lot with sticker campaigns, other than the It's Okay to Be White. Oh, and they just had another one. What was it? Open Borders. What's the 100 handers one that they just did in the UK? Open Borders something. Anyway, yeah, and it was a disgusting, racist, as they described it. Yeah, that's the last one I saw, I think. El Vaquero 555 says, what do you think about these signals? Oil futures went below negative, and a bunch of other bad stuff happened. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what that game is yet. I need to talk to someone who understands energy and economic games surrounding energy. And there are apparently like agreements regarding how it gets sold and at what prices and things that are about to renew. There's a bunch of behind the scenes shit that I don't understand going on, and I'm not going to be able to offer any opinion about it because of sheer ignorance. Now, if I talked to someone who knew what the hell they were talking about, I might be able to add something to it, but I need their guidance. Otherwise, I'd be making all kinds of guesses about how that shit works that I don't understand. John Goris, hello sir, Ghost Tank in the house, says, you ever think of getting on Tim Kelly's show? He was kicked off of YouTube pretty much. He redirects people to his Spreaker channel. He's had Jay Dyer, EMJ, Borzoi, Boscovich on. I don't know about him. Shoot me a link in the comments section and I'll go check it out. Where are we? King Salmon Fish. The Loud Redhead thing. Oh, fucking no. I just slid past it. And there is such a lag. I'm going to go back and try and find it again. The Loud Redhead worn by an alpha triggers the autonomic, and he solves bigger threats than the noise, which is inherently funny. Apparently, I'm not the only one drinking apple juice. And if that's not the case, I apologize, friend. I cannot follow the question. CC says, Semigog, during Millennial, you argued that a theoretical ethnostate would necessitate law as to who would be white enough. I assume, would this lead to a white caste system? I can't remember the point you have reference to, nor with which millennial it was, the most recent one or the year before. Yes, any state would require law, whether it's theoretical or ethno, as to who would be white enough. Okay, so you're talking about when I talked about defining white in the sense that you would need to legally, in order to have a standard that was binding at law. I don't know that it would lead to a white caste system, but it would be a sort of a binary decision tree. Do you meet X criteria or do you not? And I still tend to think that that is going to have to be addressed in some fashion or another, because doing anything about that would require it being written into law, or at least some standard being established, and it would have to be based on specific criteria rather than, you pass, which is subjective, and how that's going to be done. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it raises all sorts of interesting questions, and how it is done matters. Yours truly says, Semigog, how deep do you think is the damage done to the population's psyche? Will they snap out of this? I don't know. I don't have a read on it yet. And then there's the bubble versus sort of the red heartland, and I think they're two very different standards. So, yeah, I don't know how to read that one. John Ski, Semigog, about 20 minutes ago, Donald J. Trump signing an executive order to temporarily suspend immigration to the United States. Well, by God, that's worth another sip of apple juice. We'll have to see what that signals. All speculation, ladies and gentlemen, but yeah, this could get exciting. It could get exciting. I tend to not want to get over the top, and of course, probably the next time I speak with Tim, which will be us hopefully talking tomorrow, he'll just be like, calm down, kid. But there are many odd possibilities here with what's going down. Simply because any number of people, I think, are going to be becoming increasingly desperate, and you sort of get to that point where you're like, what do they have to lose? At which point, crazy shit sometimes goes off. God is in the details, says Semigog. Bookmark Mouthy Buddha's new video on the sex trafficking allegations centered around the pizza parlor in D.C. A sane treatment. I will bear that in mind, sir. Thank you. Or madam. No offense either way. All right, I'm going to have to... Trump tweet temporary ban on immigration. That's from Super Basic News. Hello, Super Basic News. Another longtime channel follower. Thank you for being here. $1 trillion bill, Semigog, serology tests, IFR likely around 0.5% now, bad, but more like 1967 flu level. If true, lockdowns are overreaction. Sweden model seems better. How do elite walk back after terrifying everyone? In stages, and based upon the claim that it was better to overreact given what we knew than not to do so. See, this is a problem. I think somebody really, 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 really badly misjudged what Trump was going to do, assuming that because classically having a good economy is, the best predictor of your re-election prospects. They probably assumed, I tend to think they assumed, I'm not sure who they are other than them, I think they assumed, and in large part the Chinese are involved with this for sure, as well as other anti-Trump globalist sort of groups. I think they assumed that the last thing that Trump was going to be willing to do was to shut down the economy, because that's his big thing. And in case that wasn't enough, because the U.S. becoming a net energy exporter has so much to do with the core of the effective or the performance of the Trump economy, they timed it. So COVID-19 happens right around the time that you see this, energy price plummet, and so he got hit twice. Now a lot of other people did too, and so those are the problems with my model, and why I think I need to back out to a higher view in order to look at this whole thing. And it gets curiouser and curiouser. But how they walk it back is complicated by the fact that in order to make Trump look bad, all those who are against him had to foment hysteria, and in order to do that, signals warfare again. They were talking about how God, G-A-W-D, God, everyone's going to die, oh my God, and everyone was freaking the fuck out, which means they're all on record having done so. So trying to single out a particular group I mean, you look at like if you watch CNN, you're going to see all kinds of footage of people on Fox, Judge Jeanine and everyone else talking about how you didn't have to worry about the virus that much. At present, it wasn't a big deal. If you watch Fox, then all you're going to see is people on CNN or Democratic people, talking about how come to Chinatown, it's not a big deal, or Bill de Blasio saying New York should remain open. The bottom line is, beyond that sort of back and forth bullshit, both sides have played the game of hyping this shit out of all proportion to reality. And so, I mean, when everyone fucked up, or when almost everyone can hide behind the fact that it seemed like everyone fucked up, then I think that kind of herd mentality comes over it, where everyone's like, well, yeah, I kind of believed it too, and yeah, well, yeah, it's water under the bridge. Well, maybe we overreacted, but what's important is to get back to work now. I think you're going to see something more along those lines. And a thought that I began to formulate, but that I didn't finish, is that I think that everybody was coming after Trump thinking that there was no way he was going to shut down the economy because it was so important as regards his re-election prospects. And I think he basically rolled with it. He took the force, wind, flowing through, or Tai Chi, right? You take the energy, or Aikido, or whatever. Though in his case, it was, the kind of Aikido that you perform while, belching hot dogs. But it worked. It was effective nonetheless. He rolled with their energy, and he said, okay, don't throw me in that briar patch. Well, now he's on the other side of it. And because everyone is in such, so many parties, so many power blocks are in dire economic straits, they're all now going to have to come to him in order to get things sorted about who gets money and who doesn't. Ultimately, I think it put Trump in a stronger position. So we'll see. They're going to come up with some kind of bullshit to try and kick sand backwards in the cat box. Horse Mumbler says, oh, God, now. Ugh. Sorry, peoples. I just had it lined up, and it did that move. Oh, man. This is really obnoxious, man. All right, Semigog, I think from Horse Mumbler, I think you might underestimate the internet does interesting thing to certain kinds of young minds. Cycle breadth awareness seems to be growing markedly, at least within thinker segments. Yeah. Beautiful thing about younger generations is that Mother Nature herself provides them with the tools they need to surprise the previous generations, while at the same time removing the good sense from the older generations that would help them to bridge the distance. Okay. Siege 919, Semiagog, ever heard of Tim Kelly and his Our Interesting Times podcast? The Powers and Principalities ones have been dead on the money lately on CV19. No, I've never heard of that, but I have heard about Powers and Principalities, from Christian scripture. And there was actually a guy, what's his name? Tim recommended him to me, and so I bought like 3 or 4 of his books. And I still haven't read them at all. And they're on Powers and Principalities. God, what is his name that wants to come out? Anyway, I won't make you wait while I try to think of it. That's all I got on Powers and Principalities. I'll be happy to check anybody. If I may not have time to go back through these comments, so if you really want me to check it out, stick a link to it in the comments under the video. The Book of Coppola, if I'm pronouncing that right. Semigog, Trump suspends immigration into the United States. Thoughts? Well, we just touched on that because John Ski mentioned it. This is just one of the ways, by rolling with this and by saying, please don't throw me into that briar patch. Please don't make me shut down the economy. Please, it'll destroy my prospects. Please, please, please. And then they did it, and he's like, okay, now we've got a perfect tool to accustom the U.S. population to the notion of limiting immigration more completely. I also tend to think that if things get weirder, more kinetically weirder between the United States and China, which I don't particularly expect at this point. It shutting down that immigration would be a useful step in terms of preventing certain things, at least limiting the range of possibilities for ways in which the Chinese could introduce new people to strike us, you know. But that's a sort of way out there thing. Now that I'm chewing on it, because this is all news to me, it occurs to me that it could be a simple political expediency. Certainly it could be both, but I think it'd be masterful political expediency because, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Why? Here's why. Because everyone's saying Trump is destroying the country. Trump is destroying the country. If he opens these things back up, you know, even though it's the governor's deal, as Tim pointed out when he mentioned that Trump had fomented a war with the governors that he would exploit to his own advantage. Even though it's the governor's deal, the powers that be, the forces of progress on the left, are all about how, oh my God, G-A-W-D, God, we're all going to die if Trump opens the country back up. Well, if Trump shuts down all travel into the United States, that fits with their whole thing, right? Well, if we're going to keep these cities shut down, we should keep all the travel shut down too. Absolutely, which would freeze immigration. Presumably, I don't know about the details, but I would assume that it creates more of a mandate for them on the southern border to block the immigration coming in. I think it's a masterful thing because the progressive Democrat, leftist, hysterical approach is to say, oh my God, the country needs to be to remain locked down. Well, Trump can say, well, we're going to open the cities up, but you guys are absolutely right. We should guard against that risk. So, you know, we can't be introducing these new variables into the equation here. So let's just shut down the borders, which is going to force all these other people to go, wait a minute, we don't want to shut down the borders. At which point Trump can say, well, which one is it? Is it such a crisis that the country is going to fall apart if I open things up? In which case it would make perfect sense to lock the borders down for the time being so that we don't introduce additional variables. Or is it that there's no reason to be locked down at all? Which one is it? I think that's what he is likely doing here. But I'm guessing. I haven't even seen this news because I've been over here doing a live stream with you patient peoples. Jem Bannister, Semigog, if the hypothesis that China and Little China break up in pieces comes to pass, where does their capital flow to? Only the US dollar and UK, who will pay for the cultural left. I don't think China is going to go away that quickly. I mean, then again, I remember at one time I was in a concert venue and there were hundreds of people in there for a live show, and they were all jumping up and down, you know, in mosh pit and all this kind of stuff, and I felt the floor flex. And I asked the guy who knew a lot about carpentry I was with, we were both working security, and he was like, you want it to flex, because otherwise it just snaps suddenly. And so that applies to China. You know, I don't tend to think that it's going to break suddenly, but the nature of breaking suddenly is that you don't anticipate it. And at present, we're feeling it flex. And I don't know enough about the economics of all of it to say where and how money would have to flow. But right now, the prospects for the cultural left, as you put it, being paid, they don't look very good. All right, I'm scrolling down here, peoples. King Salmonfish says he's going to send me an email on the subject. I will look forward to that, sir. Anyone who wants to email me can do so by sending it to Semiogog, spelled like the channel name, at protonmail. Whatever the fuck it is, .com, I guess. Sorry, peoples. I'm scrolling down to catch up on questions. We now have 17 minutes left. Baggins, New Zealand, Baggins NZ, I'm just guessing it's New Zealand. Semigog, the Dutch East India Company existed for 201 years. Do you think people will see history rhyming? is that company's and the CCP's future? I'm not quite sure what you mean. I do remember being in Holland and talking to a Dutch guy at a bar, and I'd had too many drinks, and for some reason I'd had too much apple juice, and for some reason I got confused, and I thought Unilever had come out of some guts of the East India Company that had survived, and the guy, man, the Dutch. I like them. A lot of people look at me in shock. They're like, "You like the Dutch?" I'm like, "Yes, I like the Dutch." But yeah, when they disagree with you, they think you said something wrong. They just tell you right to your face. It's like, "No, why would you think that?" And of course, he was right. I was wrong. But he happily told me, this Dutch dude, man. So, Dutch East India Company existed for 201 years. Do you think we'll see history rhyming? Is that company's and the CCP's future? I'm not sure that the Dutch East India Company ended. I think the people took the fucking mountains of money, the lucre, the wealth, the staggering fucking nation-crushing sums of money that they accumulated over generations, and they decided it would be better to pull strings in the background. So I'm not sure that thinking about the CCP's fate is a topic that is most appropriately associated with the East India Companies, whether British or Dutch. Though I do, my own hypothesis has long been, and you can see it in my poem, The Church of State, which is available on this channel as well. I've long thought that many of the powers that be that move behind the scenes at present came out of the milieu of the East India Companies. And I am scrolling down, peoples. Have I arrived at the bottom? Oh, Waterpenny has asked for a closing poem. I don't know. I've got my books ready. Oh, that's what I should tell you guys about. I have 2 books. And I'm working on some others to try to finish. I have a cyberpunk. That dates me too. But, from the period of William Gibson, I enjoyed some of his books. And the cyberpunk genre was cool when I was coming up. And so when I was in my mid-20s, I started writing a sort of cyberpunk sci-fi book. And I did not finish it until my early 30s. It sat there for quite a bit of time. I had a company for a long time and actually worked like a normal human being for a long time. And so the book got put on the back burner, but I eventually finished it in the early mid 2000s. And I went back, and it's not bad. It's in 2076. Set in Istanbul, and it's about a book thief who has to confront, among other things, a re-emerging hashishin. It's called Vinculum, and I have finally gone through it. In the background, I reread it. I did a whole proofreading pass again on it. It's older stuff. I wrote it when I was younger, but it wasn't as bad as I remembered. So it's all right. And I think the kind of people who dig sci-fi or whatever, cyberpunk, dystopian, whatever, speculative fiction, will like it. And it's ready. I put it up on Amazon, and I'm only waiting because I have a couple copies coming to check how the printing looks, with the files that I uploaded and everything else. So shortly I'm going to have a sci-fi book available for sale. Also, I have typeset and have put together a cover and everything else for a book of my poems, which will also shortly be available. I also ordered a proof copy of that. So I'm not sure that I am going to close with a poem, or at least not one of my poems. Perhaps I can read someone else's poem. Maybe. We shall see. So yeah, books are going to be ready. And also I've been reading so many of my damn poems that I don't have many left. I gotta save a few to have inside the covers of these books that I will make available. So I'm looking at questions here, ladies and peoples and ladies and gentlemen and peoples. John Ski, how's the saddle collection going? I only have 2. I still have them. They are both Circassian. Last time I talked about them, I think I was doing permethrin treatments on the wood in case some woodworms had gotten into them. I have some silver. Maybe I talked about this. I have some silver that I have to do Niello. I have to have someone do Niello inlay on, and I found a guy to do it. But that was right before all hell broke loose with the with Corona Chan. So yeah, once we get through all of this, I have to send some silver parts for him to make replacements for. You know, I've got them on one side, so if he makes the mirror image of it where it's missing on the other, I'll be able to replace it and, you know, basically do a restoration on it. Mike says, Semiagog, do you write any narrative fiction? I mean, in a little sci-fi book, narrative fiction. Maybe I don't understand what narrative fiction means. Maynard Fritz says, everybody needs folding money. Damn that shit with folding money. All right, yeah. So we are 10 minutes out, and I see a whole bunch of people's in the house, 123 at present. It was higher earlier. I appreciate you guys hanging with me. Let me see here what we got in the 10 minutes of questions remaining. Patty Burns says, Semiagog, are you aware of Chris Dangerfield's channel? He's a former communist and has a good understanding of postmodernism. I think you and he could have some interesting conversations. Yeah, I saw him. I mean, I've seen some of his stuff from wherever it is, Cambodia, where he is. Broadcasting from Cambodia. And I was like, he seems like a nice enough guy. I saw Morgoth take him to task for some things, and that was kind of funny. Morgoth just laid right into him. It was without hesitation. It was only briefly, but it was really funny. Yeah, I've seen some of his stuff. I'm trying to remember where I saw him talking, though. I saw him come on somebody's channel to talk to them, and yeah, he was surprisingly well read. Who was he talking to? And he revealed that he's, pretty well read on Pomo shit and, like, you know, did that whole side of things. And I was like, man, yeah, I could talk to this guy because, you know, to some extent, I'm not a former communist at all, but I've sort of steeped myself in some of the Pomo writing, continental philosophy and the rest. So yeah, maybe I'll have an opportunity to talk to him at some point. I think the issue, also he clearly still lives abroad, and I lived abroad for some time and partially went native. So yeah, and I think he's a self-professed former degenerate, as am I. So yeah, there could be interesting conversations. I think the main thing would be finding the proper topic, you know, basis for discussion. All right. Do we have any further questions here, ladies and gentlemen? 8 minutes out. I'm going to give you a chance to throw something down. What do we have here, ladies and gentlemen? 7 minutes left. Michael Reeves says, Semiagog, which nations of European descent are more likely to use force in dealing with migrant populations? I tend to, Tim and I have talked about this in the past, you know, at different times he seems to think you might see something out of the Swedes or are likely to see something out of the Swedes and even out of the Germans. For my part, I tend to think, you know, the kind of pop off, fly off the handle, hot-blooded temperament might be the one that you would expect to be more likely to serve as a spark to set everything off, in which case I'd be looking at the French or the Italians. So yeah, I'm not sure. Benjamin Root says he was on a cigar stream with AA, presumably talking about Dangerfield. Maybe that was. No, it wasn't a Keith Woods hangout because I haven't watched really Keith Woods stuff unless he appears on somebody else's channel. Hard to watch, says Semiagog. heard you mention John Mark, but have never heard you talk about propertarianism. Some of John Mark's stuff I like. I've interacted very briefly through, short Twitter discussions with Kurt Doolittle. I have nothing bad to say about John Mark. I sometimes watch his content. I'm subscribed to his channel. Some of what he's saying I agree with. Kurt Doolittle, it becomes a little bit more, the question becomes a little bit more complicated. I'm a total autist, and I go off, navel gazing and trip over my own neck all the time with speculation. So I'm certainly the last person who should be complaining about how someone is too lost in abstractions. But even for me, Kurt Doolittle tends to be a little out there. And, when I try to go find his material, to find it written down, and again, I get it. I would have written you a shorter note, but I didn't have time. Nevertheless, if he's pitching it as the best thing since sliced bread, it's kind of incumbent upon him to have distilled it down and to have all the stuff laid out. And what you see on his various websites, because there are a number of them that are half finished and they're under old URLs, and it's you kind of go looking for where's the core, and you understand. You finally, or at least I finally, arrived at the point where I realized this is all work in progress. Like, this dude is selling it as great, and it's a work in progress. And so it's like propertarianism is the solution. And then you're like, well, but propertarianism isn't done yet, because it's not all completely laid out, and it's a group effort, and it's not done yet. But it's the solution, and I'm just distill it. And I get it. My stuff isn't distilled, but I'm not presenting all of it as the big solution. So anyway, they don't seem like bad guys. They don't seem like bad guys. Certainly not John Mark. So I don't want to say anything bad about him. And again, I follow John Mark's content, and I don't think that we need a bunch of shit talking on the right. But I just don't grok whatever it is fully that Kurt Doolittle is trying to get across, and being most of the time rather quick on my feet. I'm not ready to accept that I don't understand what he's saying because I'm not smart enough. And while I have huge gaping holes of ignorance in my education, I'm also not quite ready to accept that the reason I don't understand all of his ideas is that I'm not well read enough. So if it's not that I'm too stupid or ignorant, why is it that I don't really follow his ideas? All right. John Ski's giving me a poem to read. I'm a little frightened of that. Maynard Frith says, does Ollie ride? I used to. I had multiple, at least 7 motorcycles before I ever owned a car. Driven cross country twice. I don't have one now. As Tim used to say, I got tired of using my kneecaps for fenders. Rode bicycles too, but this beautiful face was badly damaged when I had to use it to break my fall after having been hit on my restored rally bicycle by a dill rod. So yeah, I now only ride bicycles where I don't have to immediately interact with big heavy metal cars designed to smash human beings to a red pulp. Alright, what am I missing here? We got 2 minutes left. I'm going to look and see if there's a nice clean. Baggins MZ says, do you maintain a garden, Ollie? No, I've got a rosemary bush my mother made me plant. Just like to at least have something. But I hope to change that soon. Perhaps I'll smack a woman over the head with a club, or she'll smack me over the head with a club. In either case, the two of us can elope to the forest, at which point I will consider putting together a garden, but I have to get out of the city first. Benjamin Rood says, laugh out loud, grok, is that a 2000 AD bit of slang or just from the 80s cyberpunk? No, that's from Robert Heinlein. As the older ones among us will know. J-Rock says, Semiagog, do you see the return of Salvini soon? Yes, but I haven't been following it closely, so there might be some kind of shit going on in the background that, I haven't followed. Okay, so I've got 1 minute left. I'm going to skip a poem. I'm just going to share with you what I got coming up. I got a talk with JF on Thursday that is theoretically... Let me open my calendar here. Where is that damn thing? I can't see around my apple juice. What do I have? I'm going to talk to Tim tomorrow, and I'm going to record at least one discussion with him. If you guys have topics and suggestions, stick them in the comments for this video for me to talk to Tim about. But put them in the comments, not in the chat, in case I don't have time to go back through the chat. So yeah, talk to Tim tomorrow, and I will record. And then on Thursday, I'm going to be talking to Monsieur Gariapi, and theoretically, our talk is going to be about COVID-19, but he's already starting to signal that we might talk a little bit about Turkey too. Then on Friday, unless something changes, I'm going to be talking to Academic Agent, along with this cool cat named Pharaoh Ego, who has worked in advertising, does work in advertising currently. Basically, we go on to AA's channel and we talk about advertising, and we review clips, and check that out. And then what's the next one? Tuesday the 28th. So yeah, JF Gariapi on Thursday the 23rd. I'll be there. And then Friday the 24th with Academic Agent. And then on Tuesday the 28th, I will be joining Frody with Guide to Culture. That's his Decameron series of film criticism or whatever. And I will be talking to him in general terms about the zombie film genre and that escapist, accelerationist fantasy, and more specifically about the movie 28 Days Later. So ladies and gentlemen, I have talked to you about inspiration. I've talked to you about signals warfare. I've talked to you about attacking the future and attacking our children, and I've knit together a meta-narrative, and I've fielded questions, and you, all of you patient and gentle viewers, have stuck with me for the entire time. And so I thank you for it. Again, coming up on the Thursday, the 23rd, I'll be talking to JF. Friday, the 24th, I'll be talking to Academic Agent. Tuesday, the 28th, I'll be talking to Frody over at Guide to Culture. He's the Scanza Forum guy also. Please check out my appearances on those channels, and please check out those channels as well. JF, Academic Agent, and Frody. You can find Frody under Guide to Culture, Kulchur. And thank you all very much for your patience, for so kindly joining me. And I believe we have arrived at the end of this process. And so, my time with you, gentle peoples, is done. Get it? Got it? Good. Semigog, out.